Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. Yet another episode of Crushin Fantasy Football. I am Bryce Lockridge, your host of the show. All right, guys, today I'm going to be giving you guys a list of must-own handcuffs. Now, I know it's fun to talk about who your early round running backs are going to be and everything like that, but it's just as important to draft these handcuffs and make sure that we get the right ones because every single year there ends up being a handful of handcuff running backs that come in and, if the starter in front of them goes down, they absolutely go off, or even if the starter in front of them doesn't go down, they end up being awesome for fantasy as part of a split backfield. And we know that there's a ton of split backfields in the NFL now. So it's more important than ever to grab these handcuff running backs and make sure we hit on the right ones. So I'm going to start right here with the first one, A.J. Dillon. Now, this is a guy who, he's in the Packers backfield. And we know that the Packers really like to split carries between these two running backs now. This is a guy who had a 48.9% snap share last season. He scored 7 touchdowns. That was the most touchdowns he's ever scored in a season since coming into the NFL. He had 43 targets. This was a very good sign for A.J. Dillon. He's actually starting to get targeted out of the backfield. There was kind of the perception going into last season that the only running back in this backfield that caught passes was Aaron Jones. And now we figured out that A.J. Dillon could get targeted pretty heavily. I mean, 40-plus targets is very solid, especially considering that there's another pass-catching back in the backfield. So A.J. Dillon, the opportunity metrics are certainly there. We know that this team is going to have to run the ball this year if they want to be successful because, they have a pretty serious downgrade at quarterback. I'm not saying that Jordan Love can't be good, but this team is definitely going to have to run the football to be successful. A.J. Dillon should have a ton of opportunities this year, just like he did last year, and he's going to have weeks where he outcarries Aaron Jones, as we saw last year. So it's a very unpredictable backfield, and I think that Aaron Jones will still have more fantasy points because he's a little bit more efficient, but A.J. Dillon is going to see close to a 50% snap share in this backfield, and considering the fact that you could get him 70 spots later in the draft, he is the better draft value this year than Aaron Jones, I'm pretty sure. So A.J. Dillon is a must-own handcuff. On top of that, if Aaron Jones happens to get hurt, there is no one else in this backfield to compete for touches, and A.J. Dillon should have an insane opportunity share if Aaron Jones happened to get an injury. So he is a must-own handcuff. Next player on my list is going to be Zach Charbonnet. Now, obviously, Zach Charbonnet, he's not as fast as Kenneth Walker, right? He doesn't necessarily have the home run abilities. He's, Kenneth Walker's a guy who runs a sub 4.4. He has tremendous big playability. But Zach Charbonnet has some clear advantages on Kenneth Walker. I mean, he's significantly bigger, right, at 6 foot, 215 pounds. He's built like a 3-down back. He can really handle carries on, in any situation. He can be an early down back. He can be a late down back. It doesn't matter. This dude has the potential to be good in all phases of the game. We know that he can catch passes. His senior year, we saw an insane increase in his targets per game and his catches and his receptions out of the backfield. I mean, he had 37 catches for 327 yards his senior year. If you go back and look at his college statistics, he had by far and away more involvement in the receiving game his senior year than he had at any point in his college career. So there's a chance that he ends up being the main pass-catching back in his backfield. We know that Kenneth Walker isn't necessarily known for being a pass-catching back. So if we could get it back in Zach Charbonnet like 100 spots later in the draft or, maybe 70 spots later in the draft, by the time draft day comes, and he ends up being the main pass-catching back in the backfield, well, we're getting a huge advantage right there, and that's big time. In today's NFL, if you don't catch passes, you're not really as relevant as a running back, and Zach Charbonnet could easily be the main pass-catching back in this backfield, and we can invest in him a lot later than we have to invest in Kenneth Walker. So I really like Zach Charbonnet as a handcuff. David Montgomery is my next one. Now, David Montgomery is kind of stepping in to the Jamal Williams role of last year. I mean, Jamal Williams last year, he led the league in touchdowns and rushing touchdowns as a backup running back. So we know that the Lions sort of, they want to use their bigger backs, their more well-built backs when they're in goal line situations, when they're in the red zone. Last year, Jamal Williams was second in red zone touches and first in rushing touchdowns, despite a significantly more electric and efficient back and DeAndre Swift running in front of him. So what I see happening this year is Jahmyr Gibbs doing a lot of the dirty work, and David Montgomery is probably going to siphon a lot of his touchdowns. I mean, they signed him to 3 years, $18 million for a reason, and that's very much to use him as the goal line back for this team. This team has a very easy schedule and is probably going to be in the red zone very often this year. They're probably going to be one of the highest scoring offenses in the NFL, considering the fact that they do have a lot of weapons and they have a very easy schedule. So I like David Montgomery to have very high touchdown upside this season. And considering the fact that he has the opportunity to score 12 to 16 touchdowns in this offense, I really love his value. And, Jahmyr Gibbs, he's probably going to creep closer and closer to, a third or fourth round pick by the time the season starts, and you could get David Montgomery in like round 7. So I honestly would fade Jahmyr Gibbs early and just draft David Montgomery because he's probably going to siphon all of his touchdowns. All right, next on my list is going to be who we were just talking about, Jamal Williams. Now, this is a guy who, as a backup, his entire career, he's just always shown to be extremely fantasy relevant. You know, in his days running the ball behind Aaron Jones, he had some very high ceiling games for fantasy. Last year, he led the league in rushing touchdowns. This is amazing, guys. This is a guy who always takes advantage of his opportunities. We know that Alvin Kamara is probably going to miss some pretty significant time this year. I mean, look, he's got a suspension coming. We are almost certain that this, Alvin Kamara is probably going to miss time this year. That's probably the main reason that they signed Jamal Williams. And, this is a guy who he was second in the league last year in red zone touches. This guy gets force-fed the ball when in the red zone because he's a goal line back. That's what he is. This guy is a guy who gets a lot of scoring opportunities. And we know that high-value touches are everything in fantasy. Obviously, Taysom Hill is going to siphon some of his touchdown upside because we know that Taysom Hill is going to get carries within the red zone as well. And in that regard, the backfield is a little bit unpredictable, but I think that Jamal Williams has a very good chance of leading the team by a significant margin when it comes to red zone touches. And he's probably going to lead the team in touchdowns, especially considering the fact that Kamara is going to miss pretty significant time. And he has just force-fed the ball when in the red zone. And Kamara really didn't have consistent red zone touches or consistent red zone opportunity share at all last year. So Jamal Williams has very high touchdown upside once again. This is a guy who was top 10 in the league in overall rushing yards last season being a backup. He had over 1,000 rushing yards. He had 262 carries, which is top 7 in the NFL. This dude still gets a lot of volume even as a backup. And he really showed to just be way more involved in the offense than he's ever been in his career last season for the Lions. I mean, the dude had a 51.4% opportunity share in the Lions backfield. This dude is a back that can actually command some pretty good volume. And, Alvin Kamara, we don't know how much time he's going to miss. Jamal Williams could have a lot of weeks where he absolutely goes off because we know that back in the days when this team had Mark Ingram and Latavius Murray, whenever Alvin Kamara missed time, they would feature the backup running back as a workhorse, and they would get a ton of fantasy points. So I would lean on Jamal Williams this year. I think that fading Alvin Kamara is probably smart. You could get Jamal Williams super late in the draft, and he has some pretty darn good upside. Next and final player on my list is going to be Jayla Ward. Now, this is a guy who last year, 4.9 yards per carry, 5.6 yards per touch. This guy is more explosive than Najee Harris. When he got his opportunities last year, he was absolutely awesome. Now, obviously, Najee is going to command significant volume in this offense, and Jaylen Warren is going to have to continue to be hyper-efficient if he really wants to cut into Najee's workload. But I think this is something that can very likely happen. This dude is shown to be very explosive. He had a 6.5% breakaway run rate last season. This dude was busting out 15-plus yard runs relatively often. 3.82 yards created per touch. So after bouncing off that first tackle, he was averaging an additional 3.82 yards per carry. That's absolutely amazing. This is top 5 in the NFL. And the dude saw 33 targets out of the backfield. So this guy can command a decent target share out of the backfield as well. So if he cuts into Najee's overall opportunity share even slightly more than he did last year, he's going to have some weeks where he actually presents a pretty decent fantasy ceiling. And if Najee Harris were to get hurt in front of him, there's nobody else behind Jaylen Warren to really take away touches from him. So he could be the main back in this offense at some point if Najee Harris gets hurt. And watch out, if that happens, he's going to absolutely explode. All right, guys, these are my must-own handcuffs. I really hope that this video helped you guys today. That's my goal here, is to help you guys out. So make sure to get these handcuffs. They're going to be huge for you. All right, catch you later.